When the digging ended, the total was 27 murdered.
William Reese is the only suspect in the murders of Jessica Kane, Norris Miller, Kellyanne Cox, and Tiffany Johnston.
They got me set up like I'm a serial killer right now.
Tata is charged with 4 counts of manslaughter for this February 24th fire that killed 4 children.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Evidence Room. A lot of people were partying like it was 1999 in 1999, but that was also the year 4 young girls decided to go on an armed robbery spree. They even called themselves the queens of armed robbery. They knocked over convenience stores, even a bakery. When surveillance video got out to the public, it had everybody talking. How could something like this happen in the livable forest known as Kingwood? And joining me today to discuss this case is Ana Lastra, our executive producer of investigations at KPRC2.
Thanks for having me back.
No, thank you for coming. So you were in the Houston area during this time, right?
I wasn't.
Okay.
But I lived in Kingwood. My dad lives in Kingwood. I have family in that area. And so when I came across this case, when we were doing research for the evidence room, I was like, this is insane. You know, it's when you think like pop culture, like I grew up watching like the Bling Ring movies and things like that, and I always thought it was like an LA thing with celebrities. And then lo and behold, you've got 4 teenagers in the 90s who take matters into their own hands for their partying.
The teenagers are accused of holding up several Kingwood area convenience stores last summer. A surveillance tape shows allegedly Warzeka wearing a ski mask, gloves, and a hooded jacket, pointing a gun at one of the victims. Another victim identified a rifle she says was pointed at her by one of the teenagers during a robbery. Victim Cynthia Wooder testified how a gun was pointed at her head while one of the teenagers shouted, quote, "You have 2 seconds to give us the money or we'll shoot." Meanwhile, the judge briefly halted testimony when another victim became so tearful and distraught while describing the night she was robbed at gunpoint.
One of the things that I remembered specifically covering this, I was a reporter for KPRC radio at the time, and I remember my office was actually in police headquarters. I was the police beat, so I didn't go to KTRH, I went to 1200 Travis, and you'd get all the stuff like, hey, we're gonna have a news car, and they would stop by. And I remember guys, he's like, you're gonna wanna be at this one. And I said, oh, okay, he said, it's crazy, you're gonna wanna be at this one. And so I'll never forget, one of the things that was so amazing is that surveillance video. Because the thing that came to my mind is like, how did teenagers automatically get this good at armed robbery? And I know that's a horrible way to put it, but it was like they had been career criminals their whole lives, the way that they carried these armed robberies out.
When you consider Krystal Maddox being the youngest one, the ringleader, and then the oldest one, you know, being just a few years older than her, it's just crazy. Like when you think about the expertise they had in covering themselves up and just being so forceful in the surveillance video, it doesn't look real almost, you know?
We just didn't dig into our archive for this episode. We also tracked down the HPD robbery detective who put this case together in 1999. Billy Stevens is now an elected constable in Lexington, Texas. So why don't we just start with, how did this case come into the office? I mean, you were a robbery detective. How did things like this come in?
Well, I was a robbery detective working down at Central, and just like anything else, the mailman ran, and I just happened to get the case. It's not anybody gets to pick and choose their cases. It's just lieutenant hands them out.
It just came in as a
single robbery, okay. You know, and then our crime analysis people do their part, and we find these other ones, and that's how it built up to what it was.
How long did it take to start putting these together, that these may be connected?
Like a day.
Really?
Yeah, it was quick.
Why so quick?
Well, we have some great crime analysis people. They are able to link cases together real quick based on, you know, guns used, cars used, what they're wearing, just anything, tattoos, anything. They do a really good job.
Okay. So how many do we have in total? Was it 4 or 5, I think?
There was 7 total robberies, if I remember right. 2 were in Montgomery County and 5 were in Harris County.
Okay. And so when you put them together, when did you start realizing that this was a little bit different?
The voices. To me, it sounded like little boys. You don't have girl hijackers. It's highly, highly unusual. And when I could hear the voices in the videotapes, it was like, these are little boys that hadn't even reached puberty. You know, I'm thinking, this is juveniles, little kids, you know. And that's what my first thought was when looking at the videos on this.
Yeah, I remember you, when we were talking on the phone, you said you were originally concerned about ID on the suspects.
Yeah, there's no way you're going to ID these, not based on facial recognition. They were totally covered with a mask, hoodies, gloves, everything. You couldn't tell if they're white, black, Hispanic, Asian. You couldn't tell anything. And all I had to go on was the voice. That's all I had.
It was like they were career criminals from the word go. I mean, I don't know how, but they looked like they knew what they were doing right off the bat.
Somebody, one of them in the group, I don't know which one, is very smart, must have watched a lot of TV and how to get away with stuff, because they did everything right, except for a couple of things. That's why they got caught.
What were those couple of things?
One is bragging about it. That was the number one. Number 2, they didn't do it by themselves. They did it with others. You don't do a crime with somebody else, you'll get caught. And you dang sure don't brag about it.
So just thinking about like these 4 girls that were involved, or these teenagers, you know, Krystal Maddox was the ringleader. She was also the youngest one, but who were the other 3?
Well, you had Katie Dunn, and Katie admitted that part of the reason that she did this was because she had a drug problem.
It's an emotional day for 17-year-old Katie Dunn as prosecutors step up their argument why the Kingwood High School student should go to prison instead of receiving probation. The jury watched Dunn's videotaped confession. She admits taking part in several armed robberies of convenience stores, claiming she needed the money to pay for a drug habit of marijuana and cocaine.
What appeared to be an ordinary teenager on the one hand, and then they did some terrible things. And drugs are a part of that scene.
After the prosecution rested, Dunn's attorneys called several character witnesses, including Dunn's older brother and mother. Virginia Dunn testified that she believes her daughter is no longer a threat and deserves probation.
Then you had Malissa Warzeka, who was, in memory serves, was an athlete with potential scholarship, and that all got derailed because of this.
Later, the jury also heard Malissa Warzeka's written confession to police. She admits being the person in this surveillance tape, pointing a gun at a frightened store clerk and threatening to shoot unless she gets cash and cigarettes.
And then you had
Michelle Morneau.
Yes, Michelle Morneau. Now, Michelle was the oldest. She was the getaway driver.
What I remember reading about and doing some of the research for this case is Morneau appeared to be the most remorseful of the 4.
All of the girls pretty much admitted to it, but Krystal fought her charges. Then the trial actually got moved out of Harris County. It was done up in the Dallas.
In the Dallas area, yeah. And I know all 3 of the girls who weren't up in Dallas, Morneau, Warzeka, and Dunn, they testified against Maddox in their cases.
Defendant will please rise. Cause number F009927-P, State of Texas versus Krystal Dawn Maddox. Verdict of the jury. We, the jury, having found the defendant guilty of aggravated robbery, assess her punishment of confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 7 1/2 years. Signed by the foreman of the jury.
So what was the break for you finally?
I had a phone call from a Harris County robbery detective, as a friend of mine. And he says, hey, are you the one working the Kingwood girls? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, I have an informant. So we met with the informant, and the informant told us, gave me some names and said, they're going to these parties bragging about it. That was my first lead. So I got major offenders. I said, man, I need y'all's help. We got to start following these girls. So that's what we did. We followed them around.
How long?
A couple days. They did girl things. They went shopping. They went to the movies. They did all the stuff little girls do. I'm like, this can't be them. It can't be, you know? But I was wrong. It was them.
When we were talking about like doing this story for the evidence room, I was just asking you questions about the case and everything, and you said there was a particular moment in the court cases that stuck out to you. What do you remember about that?
It was the judge looking at the girls, crying, very timid, very frail, hoping that they were going to get probation and not prison time, and the judge just saying, "Spare me your tears, girls." And when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, there's not going to be any probation.
Spare me your tears.
The teenagers hope for probation, but Judge Ellis told them the punishment gives justice to their victims.
You made a choice, and that choice was to be thugs, to go out and take money at gunpoint and to terrorize these people.
I don't believe this was about drugs. You know, I think it was about greed. I hope the message goes out to everybody in our community that, you know, if you go out committing these types of crimes, there are severe consequences.
What struck me is like, there are these young teenage girls, and when I think about other situations where people may have made those mistakes in their youth, I wonder if they would have gotten like the same reaction or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? That's just speculation, but it was one of those things that kind of struck me as these girls are trying to, I don't know, like milk it with their crocodile tears almost.
I think that was pretty much what the judge was saying when the judge made that statement of "spare me your tears."
Long before this case saw the inside of a courtroom, and certainly long before a judge ever uttered the words "spare me your tears," HPD robbery detective Billy Stevens had his hands full, and he was desperate for a lead.
But then we got a tip that they were going to do another robbery. So we went out again. They didn't do anything. So I'm like, okay, this can't be them. You know, I got bad info, and which happens, you know. So now we're down to, how am I going to get these identified? I've got one option, and that's voice. That's it. That's all I have. So I went up to the school, and I talked to the principal.
Kingwood High?
Kingwood High.
Mm-hmm. What made you think to go to Kingwood High as opposed to anywhere else?
A waitress. I know it sounds funny. Me and Smitty and Pud were all sitting at a restaurant, and there was a little waitress in there with a Kingwood ring, if I remember right. So we were like, hey, tell us about Kingwood. Kingwood was just annexed. We didn't know anything about Kingwood, you know. And the little girl told us, you know, hey, go to the school. We even showed her the video, if I remember right, yeah. And she couldn't, I don't know, you know. She goes, go up and talk to the principal. So that's what I did. I went and talked to the principal, and I asked him, I said, I just need one teacher, just one teacher that all the kids know, all the kids love, that they talk to all the kids, you know. Gave me a teacher. And so I met with that teacher. They brought him in, went into the library. And I told the teacher, I said, I can't tell you anything. I can't give you any names. I can't tell you anything. But can you look at this tape and tell me if you recognize anything in this tape? So I put the tape in and played it. And about halfway through it, back that up, back it up. So I backed it up, played it again. That's Katie Dunn, which is one of the names that I had received. I'm like, how can you tell me? And I said, no disrespect, and I'm not questioning what you're saying, but please explain to me how you know this is Katie Dunn. How can you tell? He said, that voice. It's a slightly raspy voice. I know that. And I said, again, how? He goes, well, at the change of class, every day all the teachers had to go out in the hallway while the kids changed class. Where I stood for the last 4 years was next to Katie Dunn's locker. I talked to her every day. And I'm like, that's amazing. I am not believing this. So I went back and talked to the one of the assistant district attorneys, laid it all out on the table, and they were like, file it.
Robert, you weren't ever a teenage girl, but what were you doing at 16?
Not thinking about armed robbery.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I was basically just trying to make it through high school, let alone trying to plan heists.
Right. I just think back.
Well, you were a teenage girl. What were you thinking? What were you thinking at 16?
When we came across the part about the body piercings and stuff, it was like, oh, I remember going to Claire's in the mall and getting my ears pierced at 15. Things like that. But it was never to the sense of, oh, I need to rob someone, get a gun, rob someone in order to pay for these things. Or
the one thing that was typical of teenagers, though, part of it was that one school official recognizing one of the girls' voices from the surveillance video, but they also, very typical of teenagers, couldn't keep their mouths shut. They bragged about it. I mean, that whole Queens of Armed Robbery, they gave themselves that moniker. That wasn't something the media came up with. They bragged about it.
When they make this step, when they take a gun in their hand, when they go into a convenience store and terrorize these poor people, at some point they step over a line. And when they do that, the consequences are severe.
Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Queens of Armed Robbery.
Panel, please rise. Cause number F009927-P, State of Texas versus Krystal Dawn Maddox. Verdict of the jury. We, the jury, having found the defendant guilty of aggravated robbery, assess her punishment of confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 7.5 years. Signed by the foreman of the jury. Cause number F009998-P, State of Texas versus Krystal Dawn Maddox. Verdict of the jury. We, the jury, having found the defendant guilty of aggravated robbery, assess her punishment of confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 7.5 years. Signed by the foreman of the jury. Cause number F009929-P, State of Texas versus Krystal Dawn Maddox. Verdict of the jury. We, the jury, having found the defendant guilty of aggravated robbery, assess her punishment of confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 7.5 years. Signed by the foreman of the jury. So say you all.
Yes.
Let's approach the bench. Ms. Maddox, 3 weeks of trial have come down to this. Everyone in this courtroom is here because of you and the choices that you made last summer. On May the 30th, July the 1st, July the 4th, July the 5th, and July the 10th, you made a choice. Despite all the advantages you had in your home, in your school, and in your community, you made a choice. And that choice was to be a queen of aggravated robbery. Your choice placed 5 innocent people, innocent victims, in harm's way. Your choice caused those 5 people's lives to be shattered. Your choice showed that you had absolutely no regard for their well-being. Now, for what? For money? For thrills? I don't know. But in any event, I hope you understand what has happened to you. I hope you get it. Because this case has always been and will always be about the victims of the Queens of aggravated robbery. This case has always been about Cynthia Woodard, Carolyn Dunn, Chen Barker, Tavik Mahmoud, and Shaquille Ahmad. You have no one to blame but yourself. You made a choice. The minute you decided to participate in these robberies, you put yourself on the road to prison, and that journey is now complete. Do you have anything to say before I sentence you?
No, sir.
Then it's the order this court should be delivered to the Sheriff of Dallas County and to the Director of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division, where they will carry out the jury's verdict of 7.5 years in each case. I'll order that the sentences run concurrently. I'll order that you receive credit for your back time. That's it. All has been said. It's now time for the Queen to go to prison. See the bailiff.
What did you think about the judge?
Judge Ellis. He was a fair judge, I'll give him that. He didn't cut him no slack. No, he didn't. I mean, they could have got a lot more in 99 years, but Krystal got 7.5 if I remember right.
You made a choice. and that choice was to be thugs, to go out and take money at gunpoint and to terrorize these people. At some point, they step over a line, and when they do that, the consequences are severe.
I know it was strange, you said when I called you, when we spoke, when Ray called you and then we spoke, but said he hadn't thought about it though, but it sounds like it's a case that definitely stuck with you out of all the ones.
31 years working in Houston, there's always those cases that or incidents that you do. There's going to stick with you the rest of your life. Yes, the reason and the only reason this stuck with me is because of all the national attention it got. These girls were no different than anybody else. They did a crime just because they're female or white or whatever, it doesn't matter, They did the crime, but because they were affluent, I guess you can call it, from a rich community, white females, every talk show called me, every national news wanted an interview, but I told them all, I don't do that. I'm not in this for the glory and recognition, I got a job to do, I'm doing my job, I go on to my next case, There's not too many officers that are in this just to be famous,
This case happened in the 90s, when these armed robberies happened, and then you just fast forward and you have the bling ring in California.
It was a little bit of pop culture. There was a movie that came out called Sugar and Spice.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Yes, and it was loosely based. It was a group of high school cheerleaders. In the movie, they were doing the armed robbery because one of their friends had become pregnant and needed funds to have a child. And so, it was very loosely based, but I remember in interviews with some of the actors, they said, yeah, clearly there's a little bit of true life in this, and it was because of these young ladies. And you didn't see that as much then. I don't know, it's weird to say, but you see a lot more of these cases of younger people doing really horrible things. Back in the 90s, you didn't see that as much. This was really, and again, we're in a nice area. We're in the livable forest.
Yeah, it's just so strange to think, when there's these reckless behaviors of teenagers or young people involved in that. And, fast forward, you have the break-ins on these celebrities' homes, Paris Hilton. They made that movie with Emma Watson starring as the bling ring. And then there was a documentary where they actually talked to the people about how they were able to get into it and why they were doing it. And again, it was partying. It was, having that expensive lifestyle and things like that. So it's just interesting how Kingwood Queens, they were kind of the original bling ring when it comes down to it.
The interesting thing, we talk about it now, we go, it was kind of a pop culture anomaly, so to speak, But at the end of the day, it was armed robbery.
They could have been killed, and they could have killed somebody easily. That was probably one of the dumbest decisions those girls could have ever done in their life. You don't take a gun, even a play gun, and go do a robbery. You're taking a chance. Nowadays, especially, everybody's got guns, that's dumb, But I don't know. I don't know why they did that. Only they can answer that.
This is speculation just based on the research that we had done. And again, as I said, I spoke to two of the girls briefly. They seem to have had nice, quiet lives from there, but something like this doesn't go away. I think it folds into your life, and you learn to have it as a part of your life and a part of your past moving forward. But they seem to have had nice, quiet lives since they were released from prison.
It's sad. Here you got young girls, for whatever reason, whether it's they wanted attention, or they wanted money. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But for them to go out and do that and mess up their life to a degree, it's not totally lost here, but put their family through all that, it's sad.
I do remember when the young ladies came up for parole the first time, because they all got basically the same sentence. So things happened pretty much at the same time for three of them. Obviously, the other girl didn't get prison time. And People magazine I believe, did an interview with one of the young ladies, and she seemed, you know, I hate to put words in other people's mouths, but one of the things that I ask is when people confess and it's like, well, they show remorse. My question always is, are you remorseful for what you did, or are you remorseful because you got caught? In the interview, I got the sense that at least one of them really understood the gravity of what they had done, and it wasn't a game, it wasn't a simple thing. It was incredibly serious, and their entire lives had been forever altered by it.
We pray for the victims as we pray for our children.
Loved ones are disappointed but relieved Dunn and Warzeka did not get life in prison.
This is our system, and the system works. I believe the system works. And now we just need healing.
I mean, they called themselves the queens of armed robbery.
Yeah.
And I think that was another factor too, was that kind of braggadocious aspect that they had for their crimes that again led to the spare me your tears girls.
Some iconic moments, unfortunately.
It really was, but it's interesting how that had a real impact, and it was one of the many cases that Houston kind of got national attention for, but it didn't quite leave the indelible mark that others did.
Right.
You seemed interested when we talked on the phone that their lives turned out okay. And like I said, I didn't do a deep dive into everything, but I didn't see any of their criminal records, and based on where they were living, these were nice homes. So it appears that their lives turned out okay.
Good. I mean, they were young kids doing stupid stuff, and they paid their price. They went to jail. They did their probation. They've done everything that's required of them. I hope they're married, they have kids, they have a normal life, and not still doing silly stuff. You know what I mean?
Not from what we could see. We could see that they didn't do anything, yeah.
I hope they're productive citizens now.
I know it's weird because you're our leader, but I really do appreciate you coming in to talk about this case.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation to talk about such a crazy case.
Yeah, it definitely was that. And thank you for joining us for this episode of The Evidence Room. Next week at 6:30, streaming on the KPRC 2 Plus app, is our season finale, where we take you in depth to one of the worst cases this area has ever seen. It's about serial killer William Lewis Reese. Again, it streams at 6:30 on KPRC 2 Plus next Wednesday.